Hey everybody, we're back. It is still Disruptive Diner, local investment, local wealth. We've heard now from Jason Groh and from Garland Gandolfi where we've talked about what do these local investment ecosystems look like and why they're good for wealth, that's not just for investors, that's not just for the 1%, that's really for a lot of people. We're going to close now with Eric Garland, and Eric is originally from Vermont, and he's now here in the Midwest, and he and I met and we've talked a few times. We've done some interviews on internet radio that you can check out on our blog. You can see the archives, but most interestingly, we had a good conversation about what does it look like to have a healthy ecosystem, to not, to borrow from your starting slide here, to not be parasitic, so that we're not feeding on each other, but that we're actually growing an economy that's to the benefit of us all. And I think that we all realize that the way that we securitize things, so as we grow capital and as we grow wealth, we turn that into products, into security products and things, and sometimes those things have unintended consequences. And Eric has volunteered to talk about, we started off kind of saying like, is Wall Street good for Main Street? And it's kind of evolved now, and I'm excited to see where you've taken this. And he's also going to allude to some great writing on his blog that you can follow on to see some things about kind of what happens when how our communities and our jobs and how we consume things and the economies that we have, what happens when parts of that become kind of parasitic. But I hope that we're going to talk also a little bit optimistically here and have some solutions near the end.
Always a Hollywood happy ending.
Yes, there we go. Very good.
We're Americans.
I
That's
like
how we roll.
I like that we can be cynical about a happy ending. And without further ado, I am going to give you Eric Garland. By the way, Eric, I'm sorry, one more time. Eric doing Pachachka styles. So that means he has 20 slides, 20 seconds each. Cut him some slack if he's not always in perfect sync with his slides. Cut him some slack if he looks flustered. He's got a lot of good things to say, and he will probably come and tell you why you're wrong afterwards if I don't. So, no, but we're going to have fun. It's a good presentation. Here's Eric Garland. Are you ready, Eric?
Let's do this. There we go. I've got two images for you here that I think are metaphorical of different types of economics. On the left is Giardia, which is a parasite that lives on you. It sucks the life out of you. It gives you diarrhea. You get it from tainted water, and it is very, very hard to get rid of. It is. Oh, is that? Holy crap! Yeah. So, I've been talking a lot about parasitic types of finance. There's a lot of problems we've seen since 2008. And one of the biggest examples kind of bit me in the butt this past December when I started writing about Guitar Center's recent financial trouble. And I'm a musician. I normally don't think much about the musical instrument sector, but I heard from a friend that Guitar Center had gone to junk bond status, and I wrote about it in an article. Now, it's only about a $7 billion industry. It's about the size of the mattress industry. So it just never really, this is me playing the Crew Rider family band. This is normally where I intersect with the industry. But I wrote this thing called Guitar Center and the End of Big Box Retail, and 150,000 people came to my blog in 5 days. And I touched this nerve because I found out that Standard & Poor's had cut the Bain Capital-owned Guitar Center Holdings, Inc. paper down to CCC plus from B minus, which is junk bond status. And I started to learn about how we took this company that originally was on the corner of Pico and I forget, in West Hollywood. They were originally Organ Center, but became Guitar Center after the Beatles hit America, and they were this local player. And they were growing quite organically. And then some heavier types of finance got involved. And things took a different turn. Now you have a venture capital firm called Weston Presidio that invests in all these different organizations. Investment, not by its nature necessarily a bad thing. Capital formation, not a bad thing. But these guys got involved with Guitar Center back around 2000 and started with the plan to take them public. Not a bad idea. Retail was going great, and you had a certain thing going on in the in the consumer spending sector where we had this big housing bubble going on, and finance elsewhere in the ecosystem was getting all, the wages aren't going anywhere, but we're getting all this spare capitals flowing into the whole system. And retail's a great place to put it. So the Guitar Center thing, I couldn't find a picture of them ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, but they got public in 2002. So somewhere in about 2 or 3 years, this private equity firm gets a lot of new capital in, they grow. It's all seeming kind of organic, and things are going well because we're getting out of a certain recession. Up until about 2007, another private equity firm called Bain Capital came to national prominence when this guy in the center, Mitt Romney, ran for president, and people started talking about what kind of finance they did. These guys have a very similar playbook, but they took these guys from public back to private with the idea of doing it again. We're going to make it even bigger. But see, life is a timed adventure. So these guys stacked a whole ton of debt to be sort of out here in 2017 with the idea of we're going to take them in, pack them full of debt, make them even bigger, and start to dominate the market. And then we'll be out, we'll take it back public, and that's where we get our payout. Now, the competitive strategy here, there's only one type of organism that wants to be growing all the time. That's a cancer cell. So, but normally what size gets you in the marketplace when you are a dominator, and they have $2 billion out of the $7 billion in the industry, is that you can begin to have your way with vendors and employees and competitors. And there's really a systemic effect here. There's not necessarily a growing market, but you can start to extract more rent out of that industry. Because remember, if you're going from 2007 to 2017, in 2008 we had a bit of a blow up. Now, nature does not always like big things. Yeah, I'm 40, I'm from the Star Wars generation, so we're going to talk about somebody big getting taken down by the little people. You have the Ewoks taking down the forest walkers from Star Wars. I've arrived at this place in my life. I can now use this as a business metaphor. But Guitar Center's had a lot of problems recently, and to avoid going bankrupt here, they just handed off to another firm that owned the most of their debt. And there's a lot of indication that it's kind of the end of the road, and these guys are probably stripping the place for parts. And I've spoken, as a result of my writing, I've spoken to just dozens and dozens of people all over the industry that talk about the impact of this. Well, so the new guys are in, and they're pushing their debt out to 2020. But most of the debt is going to be either subprime or completely junk, and we're at a record, almost to the record for last year, for junk bonds. We haven't seen this kind of activity since the 80s. So basically, my question is how do we get back to something that is healthy and doesn't just take all the money in an industry with the goal of paying off a handful of financiers? I've talked to just dozens and dozens of people in the music industry, and they all are in it for the love of the art. They're all in it for their communities. This is Dave Hinson. He runs Killer Vintage, up in South City, St. Louis. That's him with Les Paul here. Dave's a great guy. He has forgotten more about Guitar Center's breakfast than you'll ever know. And he employs guys. I know his employees. He carries some vintage stuff. He carries local manufacturers, specializes in this. This is Reverb. I talked to these guys yesterday. They're up in Chicago Music Exchange. It doesn't have to be a local retailer. This guy, the guy who started Reverb, he's like, I know that there's billions of dollars of capital in people's closets. I want to give them a fair shake for it. I want to give them fair price instead of just taking 30% off the top. I talked to a guy named George Grexa who's restarting the acoustic bass amp line. He says it's the greatest bass amp in the world. It's harder to get in when you have an ecosystem that is dominated by one player. I've spoken to lots of entrepreneurs that say it's pretty hard when you've got to grow your dream when you're in that kind of environment. So the question is for all of us, what do we want out of finance? What do we want out of investment? And where are we going? What are we trying to create? Do we mind tolerating parasitic behavior? Or are we trying to grow something that affects more than just the numbers on the balance sheet?
All right.
Wow, I had more to say about that than the... But that's the fun of Pachak.
Yeah. So once again, if you're watching remotely, you can tweet or text or email to me any questions. Question came in from my head.
Okay.
So seems like you're saying that professional capital bad, and I don't think that's what you're actually trying to say. What you're trying to say is that this consolidation that happened, that this model of moving a $7 billion industry to being dominated by a $3 billion player.
Yes. 2.1.
2.1.
And falling.
And falling. That wasn't necessarily great for the industry, and that's resulted in our prep conversations, you talked about that now these guitar makers, so these people that are making the guitars are trying to sell them, they're now, we'll pay you in 3 months, maybe 4 months. So terms are being extended, and so it's actually hurting local business. It's not just that they forced out.
But there's a lot of independent players that have been pushed out, and some of this is, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But however, it's the last bit where you got a company that is being floated by special types of finance that you and I can't access for our business. So we've totally tilted the competitive landscape to people that just have better lawyers and are just bigger. And the entire reason for having a civilization based on law is so it's not the law of the jungle. It's not who's ever biggest can come over and hit you in the head with a tree branch and take your dinner. That is why we have gone to the moon. That is why we have.
It's the nature of a civilization.
It's the nature of civilization, and what we've had, and we see it we see it in the rising inequality in our society. We see it in the disappearance of the middle class, the draining of wealth away. I mean, and the story that we heard from Garland about people. There's a market for 435% loans. Well, there's a market for meth too.
Yeah. Right. So
it ain't exactly healthy, is it?
Yeah. So I would spin that around to say that there's a market for needing investment, needing lending products at that point. Nobody is saying, I'd like to have 435% loan, please.
No, that's parasitic. That is profit off desperation. There are people that are in desperate straits, and they may not be numerate enough to understand the consequences. And you've got people totally willing to take that trade. So it's not finance. I mean, is that by the way, that capital, the capital is coming from your Citibanks and your Bank of Americas. It comes from the big boys. So,
but if I don't care about the music industry, then we're fine because the Guitar Center is an outlier, right? This doesn't happen anywhere else.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. Ask somebody who runs a farm store or a hardware store. Home Depot was created by private equity in order to dominate a category. Because when you dominate something, you're not just competing anymore like, I'm going to build a better mousetrap. What you're doing is you're saying, now I can pressure vendors into giving me better terms, dropping their prices. I can push manufacturing where I want it to go, where it's cheaper and better for me. I can push my employees down, push wages down. And we've been seeing that. Ask people about the effect of Home Depot. And the only reason Home Depot was possible was because of that type of financing, and it was a project of private equity. Does this mean I hate banks and banking, and I want to use Bitcoin for everything, and and barter? Not necessarily, but we need to recognize where some types of finance are just creating certain structures that really only benefit a few people. And when I compare a parasite versus a big diverse ecosystem. This coral reef, we like it because it's pretty and it's got nice colors and fishies are nice. But remember, people die in that too. The fishies eat each other, and the weak do die. And but it's functional. It's not a monodirectional thing, and there's not constant collapse. And all this would be kind of rote if we didn't come within a hair's breadth of chaos in 2008. And my office was 2 blocks from the White House. I saw the briefings that they were giving the Congress, which was that if you don't give these guys a bailout for their last round of bad bets and pay them off in full, the currency system's going to collapse and there's going to be 1 million people dead in the United States in 2 years. That kind of went down the memory hole, but I remember it. And then we turned around, we set the same guys up to do the same thing. And the question that I have in general is 5 years later, 6 years after that, are we better off? Are we creating more jobs? And the answer is no, or if we're creating a higher number, they're not of the same quality. And if you don't believe me, ask the 28-year-old living in your basement.
So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Eric. Eric is a consultant. He's a writer. I encourage you to check out his website. He works with large organizations, small organizations. Really some interesting things to say. But I want to just close by, one of the comments that I was seeing coming through in some text to me is, what you're talking about and what kind of we've been talking about overall today is a resilient and diverse economy, so that there's room in there for large products, there's room in there for big exits, there's room in there for a lot of things, but that it has to be resilient, and which really kind of echoes a lot of things that we're thinking, kind of survivability long term and sustainability long term.
And monoculture is not resilient. Monoculture falls over eventually. So. And the Hollywood happy ending is we're actually not that far off from functionality. Maybe enforce an antitrust case or two. Put somebody guilty of fraud instead of letting them give that day's profit as a fee. Maybe put someone in jail.
Convicting Milken the last time around, did a lot for kind of cleaning up the junk bond industry.
Oh yeah.
So we thank you for being patient with us. We've run a little bit long today. If you're here in the room, I encourage you to stick around a little bit. We've got a discussion guide. If you're watching remotely and you're a member, you probably have seen our discussion guide, or it's being distributed in your room. Talk about it a little bit and think about what a resilient local economy looks like, why it benefits everybody. And when we come back next month, we have Foreshadowed by Fiction, and we actually have 3 science fiction authors that are going to talk about how they use the science fiction process and the fiction process to speculate about innovation that they can do something with in the real world. So it should be a great event. Thank you once again, Eric. Thank you to Galen and to Jason. Great topic, great audience. Have a great day.